What up, what up? Welcome back to Shoot, Punch, Kick, where three cops in too deep blow their cover to talk 80s and 90s cinematic violence. I'm Dash, reunited with fellow loose cannons, Telly and Carlos. What's going on, gentlemen?
I'm in too deep. Dash.
What's going on, Telly?
Take this badge.
I'm good. Looking forward to this one.
You're gunning your badge. Today, we are talking about Broken Arrow, directed by legendary action filmmaker John Woo. And this is his second American film after Hard Target, released in 1993, which starred Jean-Claude Van Damme. But this one stars John Travolta and Christian Slater in the lead roles. Released February 9th, 1996. This one spent 2 weeks at #1 in the box office. So a hit. I forgot the numbers of what it did overall, but pretty successful movie. This is our first John Woo movie. I'm sure it won't be our last. And let's just start off with everybody's thoughts on one of the goats of the space. Let's start with Carlos. What do you think about John Woo and his long run of films?
I love John Woo. I remember the first time I ever saw a John Woo movie. Telly and Carlos Beta had taken me. We're saying we're going to the theaters, and they wouldn't tell me what it was. All they did was tell me, "You were about to watch an action movie that's going to blow your mind," which is a bold prediction for them to make because they hadn't seen it. We were in line for. Oh my God, I can't remember the name of the movie now. What's the one in the hospital?
Hard boiled.
Hard boiled.
Oh.
And they were absolutely right. My mind was completely blown away by it. And they were making that prediction based on The Killer. So there's a long history of John Woo love. And I'm not sure if this is the best indication of his work. But I guess we can discuss that a little bit more. I love John Woo. And I don't think that this is really representative of his talent.
Log out. No, I'm just playing.
Get out. Good day to you, sir.
What do you think about John Woo?
John Woo, I remember reading the Daily News, and there used to be a columnist that wrote about B movies. And like one of his favorite movies of the year that came out on video in like 1988, 89 was The Killer. And I'm like, what's The Killer? And I went out and rented it, didn't know what to expect, and it just blew my mind. And then that's how I was playing that like 24/7 at home, watching that all the time. Found out Hard Boiled was playing in Cinema Village in Manhattan. Brought the two Carloses out. We saw it. We came home. We were just like playing with toy guns, just pretending to shoot each other. And then we started making little movies together. Remember that? Spray painting our water guns black.
Yeah.
Which would probably get us killed now.
100%.
Shot by police. But yeah, John Woo is like amazing. His movies, his Hong Kong movies, his Hong Kong action movies during his golden age, late 80s, early 90s. I don't think, some of the best of its kind, and we'll never see movies like that ever again because everything's like CGI now. But very underwhelmed by his American films, and was underwhelmed by Hard Target. That's grown on me, but watching Broken Arrow 28 years later, that definitely has not grown on me.
Jeez, I can't believe it's been 28 years. I didn't watch John Woo movies until way late until I was actually working in the video store. I knew of it. I think I might have seen you guys watching The Killer at some point. I knew about like some of the staples of his work, like, the standoff and the guns pointed at each other and stuff, but I didn't watch it until I was probably like 18 or 19. And by then, I already knew a lot of the lines from The Killer because all of the samples were on the Raekwon album, Built for Cuban Links. So it was like watching this movie where the whole album was just taking these snippets from it, and I was blown away by it. I went the next day, returned it, took out Hard Boiled, started watching A Better Tomorrow, and I agree, like his American run definitely did not measure up to that level. But one of the things
mentioned the Face Off though. Come on.
Oh yeah, no, the Face Off I think is like the closest that American we got film, back to that. And one of the things that I found really interesting that really shaped how I watched his stuff was that he was a kung fu director, and he said that he wanted to use guns the way that the swords
Kung
were,
Fu.
like not focusing on the reloading and just taking out, swarms of enemies with it. And it just thought it was such a stylized look of action that I just never saw before, and probably not since. And just really loved his work, and still stuck with some of his stuff that he made after The Killer. But yeah, they just weren't hitting the same notes. But let's go. We'll dive more into Hard Target, maybe on a different podcast. Talk more about Broken Arrow, but let's go to our friends at ChatGPT and see what Skynet has to say about the plot synopsis
Digital overlords.
of this movie. So in Broken Arrow, 1996, rogue Air Force pilot Major Vic Deakins, played by John Travolta, hijacks 2 nuclear warheads during a training flight, planning to extort the U.S. government. His co-pilot, Captain Riley Hale, played by Christian Slater, escapes Deakins' attack and teams up with Park Ranger Terry Carmichael to thwart the scheme. Deacon deploys mercenaries and uses deception to stay ahead, but Hale and Carmichael persist, leading to an explosive showdown on a moving train. The film combines high-stakes action with themes of betrayal, heroism, and the race to prevent nuclear catastrophe. Any beef with Skynet?
Pretty on point.
I don't know about betrayal, because like John Travolta was an asshole from the beginning, so it wasn't like there was a turn or something. But yeah, he betrayed his country. Yes, but that's really it.
Yeah, definitely the themes.
I think that's a perfect kind of segue going into it, right? I don't know why, but in my head, in this movie, I just always remembered the two of them, Travolta and Slater, not just being partners on this kind of one flight, but like being really good friends. And like Travolta was like his mentor, and that made the betrayal that much more kind of painful. But none of that. I just made that whole shit up. They barely had any relationship going on from
you filled in Act 1 for this movie. Yeah.
That didn't exist because I'm watching it and I'm just like, John Travolta's just kind of being a dick to Christian Slater this whole intro. Like, you don't get any impression that they were ever friends, that they have any history, that there's any respect between the two of them. Right. Well, if anything, they're a little antagonistic. And John Travolta's just being preachy to him, like he's just kind of being a dick to him the whole beginning of the movie. And it's funny because in my head, while I'm watching this, the intro sequence is just John Travolta in the ring with Christian Slater, fucking him up. And in my head, because I have funny thoughts about John Travolta. I don't know if it's the Scientology thing or what, but in my imagination's version of what John Travolta is in real life is fucking hilarious. I don't know if it's the Scientology thing, right? But he's just a weirdo in my head, and maybe he's not a weirdo. But I have this image in my head of John Travolta at a meeting with John Woo, right? And I don't know if there's translators there, if it's, I don't know how good John Woo's English is or John Travolta's Chinese is, but I just imagine they're having a pitch meeting, and he's like, what would be good? What if we start the movie, right, and it's a scene with me and Christian, and I'm just fucking him up. Like, let me just fuck him up for like 5 minutes and talk shit to him. I think that'll be a really great way for us to start the movie. You're right? And there was like no lesson learned from it, no kind of message that was gonna make sense, nothing valuable, at least that was gonna make sense later on in the movie.
They set up the final showdown,
the rope-a-dope and the showdown.
It's bookended basically with those two scenes. But it's funny because as I was watching the opening, and they have that overhead shot of the boxing ring, I'm like, what the hell is this? I don't remember any of this, So it's just my problem with the movie is just that there's not much of anything in it that's memorable. So I was watching this again. It was like the first time I was watching this movie.
All right, I'm gonna probably go on the opposite end, but we could talk about just like the initial reactions of the movie overall. Going in the opposite way, I was really high on this while watching it. Going into it,
you were high or you were?
No, it's just like really, right. I really enjoyed it.
Why you liked it so much?
Are you high now telling us about it? Because it seems like an odd take for you to make when you're sober.
No, because the thing is there's the criticism I totally get. And some of that is what I really liked about it, because it was like they didn't have that established history. It was just very like telling. Like there were a couple of moments where you can see that they set up a little bit, and it's, you know, this is very minor stuff of like that they apparently like bet on these boxing matches. There's like a line where he's like, you know, you're holding back. So they do establish some sort of history there, but he's also like an asshole to him. So it's not at the level of like a Top Gun rivalry, but I did get some of that from that sequence of it. And it is over the top, like the slow motion parts. Like there are certain moments, like when they enter a room, it's in slow motion. The boxing is like not done realistically, and I kind of like the idea that they're trying to present this thing in that really melodramatic fashion. I know that we had like the same kind of note about She Shoots Straight, right? Like where there was some stuff where it was like so cheesy and like over the top, but it kind of reminded me a little bit of the stuff that isn't so American movies, and that I kind of like about the like this happens in The Killer. This happens, you know, not that same level, but just some of the melodramatic over the topness I felt was in this.
It's funny when you say that. I'm glad you brought that up, because when I first started watching it, there was something that was off to me, and it was like the shots, the use of slow motion, people on the phone, and the camera like quick panning to them to get this like really dramatic effect, and it seemed very over the top. It seemed very cheesy to me, and then it occurred to me that if I was watching an Asian cinema movie, if this was John Woo's Broken Arrow with Chow Yun-fat and, you know, somebody else, it wouldn't seem odd to me. And then something clicked in my head that John Woo is directing this, even though it's an American film, with a very Asian film sensibility. Right, a lot of the shots all fit, like just seemed odd and overly dramatic and cheesy in the context of an American film. But then when you switch that over and you think in the context of Asian cinema at the time, all of these shots that I found awkward and stilted all fit perfectly into Hard Boiled or The Killer. The musical choices, some of the slow motion decisions, just all weird. But then all of a sudden that happened and it clicked. And it's funny because what would have been a barrier for me to really enjoy this movie going forward, all of a sudden, now once that click happened, I was able to accept those things more. But it's almost to the extent where it made me question if Face Off is really that good. Because I don't know, I was like, I love Face Off. I mean, again, fair, I haven't seen it in years, so maybe it's one of those that doesn't hold up. But I just remember always loving that movie, even with some of the oddities of John Woo's film style for an American film. But that all seemed to work in Face Off, and I just felt like it never really worked in Broken Arrow. And then with John Travolta being the way he was in the beginning of this movie, he didn't come off as like a hard on you mentor, which I think maybe he thought he was coming off at. He just kind of came off, you know, in every office there's that one guy who's a dick.
Well, he's like smoking cigarettes, and the guy, like he's a dick
in the other guy's
everybody.
office.
Yeah.
He's just a dick. He's just an overly aggressive dick. That annoying guy where you're gonna go get coffee in the morning by the coffee machine, and then you see that he's there, and you're like, nope, I'm not gonna sit here and wait for this coffee machine and have to talk to this guy for 5 minutes. I'm out of here. And so instead of coming off as like, you know, respectfully, worthy of respect and a grizzled veteran who should be heard, kind of like the main villain in The Rock, kind of had that gravitas to him. This guy just kind of came off as the annoying guy at the office who's just a dick to everybody. I don't know. What do you think, Tal?
I felt a bit different because I didn't feel he was a real character. It was John Travolta hamming it up, probably overriding John Woo in terms of like, oh, I'm going to play it this way, you know, hey, this is going to be cool. And just kind of doing his thing because he was this was like his first movie after Pulp Fiction, right? Where he kind of made his...
No, I think this was like
his
third.
He did like Michael. He did one where he was like an angel.
He did
alien.
White Man's Burden.
Oh, no, White Man. But that wasn't
there.
what sort of brought him back into the limelight. But either way, you could
Get Shorty.
It feels like this is like a star vehicle for John Travolta, and he's just going to do whatever he wants because this is so out of character. So going back to what you were saying, Carlos, I just felt, for me, I felt the opposite. I didn't feel this was a John Woo movie at all. It just felt very workmanlike. There's his trademarks are very muted. And I think the reason why the visual language doesn't hit is because in John Woo's movies, the main character is very charismatic. I mean, usually it's Chow Yun-fat, right? The ones that we love, and very grounded, very naturalistic acting, not like hammy the way like John Travolta was. So that's why it just disconnected with me, because he's supposed to be the bad guy, but he's also essentially the main character, because he was the star at that point. So it's one of those situations where I feel like his star power was overriding like any sort of narrative decisions for them.
And the messed up thing about it too is I really feel like, again, mind you, I have this image in my head of who John Travolta is in real life amongst the people, and I feel like this character is who John Travolta is in real life. Like, I don't think he was acting in this movie. I think he was just like, if this is me stealing these nukes from the government and this is what I would say here. This is like, I feel like if you met him in person, the way his jokes don't fall, the way he's acting kind of like he thinks he's really clever, but he just comes off as corny. I feel like that's the way John Travolta really is in real life. I don't think, and it begs the question. It made me think further. Have we seen John Travolta act well in anything?
Look who's talking. No,
good answer.
No, I would say I do like his work in Pulp Fiction. Blowout, yeah. I think he is really good. Brian De Palma.
Okay,
but yeah, I think he can.
I think Grease is his pinnacle.
Yeah, but I think overall, like, it definitely is hammed up, and it's just, I think, comes across as like, do you like that or didn't you kind of situation. But in terms of like the way I think Face Off was it didn't start off with the foundation of this friendship, right? Like, I think if you're going like bad guy, good guy, Nick Cage, what's their relationship to each other? There's a lot of shorthand you can do. Guy tried to kill his son. You can just skip over all of that animosity to each other. But I think that, and for me, the weak point of the movie was that first half hour, which is essentially trying to build up this relationship that when John Travolta turns on him on the plane, I don't know if it's supposed to be like, oh shit, because, it's marketed as he's the villain of this movie, but usually there's a little bit more of a camaraderie between the two. So it didn't have I think the strong writing to establish this like rivalry of it. But what I did like is the John Wooism of how it's presented film wise. Cause the slow motion stuff, the sweeping cameras, that's where I was like, there would just be two people talking and the camera's just like for no reason. And one of the things that stood out to me was, that was one of our big criticisms on Executive Decision of just like, we were saying like, oh, it was two people in a boardroom or whatever. It was a lot of like exposition talking, but it just wasn't engaging or visually interesting, where the second this joint started, it was just John wooing. Like, there was a moment that I watched it and it was like they walk into, so it's after they do the boxing match and they come in with their flight uniforms on, there's like just one shot of just them entering the room in slow motion, and then it just cuts to them walking in regular speed. No reason at all, or 100% like, it just added to the vibes of it, which I really liked. And I thought some of the little like moments with like the $20 bill and the talking was so cheesy that I just found myself smiling. But
I mean, again, that's John Woo stuff.
Yeah,
that's some real John Woo.
It wasn't even sort of played up.
Even in Mission Impossible,
it just didn't feel like it was like a theme or it's just something that was important, because cinematically he just didn't. That whole $20 thing just wasn't sort of sold. He didn't really sell that very well in terms of making that sort of any sort of symbolic sort of thing in the movie. It's just kind of there and you just don't care. And yeah, I think my biggest problem was just like there was no camaraderie between the two. Mm-hmm. And just to go back to like sort of old John Woo, if you ever seen a bullet in the head, bullet in the head, not the head, bullet. Yeah. Wait, which one was the Stallone one?
Bullet to the head.
Bullet in the Head, the John Woo movie, where you've got like these 3 or 4 friends, and they're like, you establish this friendship, and then later in the second half of the second act, where there's this betrayal, you really feel it, and then the rest of the movie, this is like retribution that the main actor is getting. But in this movie, it's like the second scene, basically. Like,
John Travolta was even nice.
An asshole.
Even nice to him. Just, you don't have to be like friendly.
Yeah, but it's not even like betrayal, because you get a sense that John Travolta's Christian Slater's mentor, or Christian Slater takes him seriously at all. It just feels like the gym teacher at school that talks about like how he could have played professional ball, and you're not listening to him, So it's not taken seriously.
Yeah, at one point he even tells Christian Slater,
we haven't talked about Christian Slater yet, but we'll get to that.
At one point he tells Christian Slater, like, there was a moment where I was considering, like, joining you in, or, allowing you to take part of this. And I was like, I don't believe you.
Yeah.
I don't believe you. You know what I'm saying? You just don't seem like you guys were close enough to even have that conversation.
Mm-hmm.
There was just no redeeming, like, and again, I'm not sure how much of this is really a bad statement on the movie itself, because it doesn't necessarily promise you that they're going to be friends. I think some of this is just my own disappointment in a memory that I had of this movie, the blanks that I filled in that never existed. So maybe I just did this to myself. Maybe, I'm feeling like I have been cheated out of some character building and some relationship building that wasn't there, but that I was never promised, that I just made up. Yeah. I don't know.
I mean, I think one of the things with this movie is, and it kind of not reminds me because it's the same writer as Speed, but it's a situational action movie. So essentially, we're only really seeing these characters for a day, right? Like, we see them train. Next scene, they go to get the information about the plane that they're going to fly, and then debrief. Shit pops off, and then it's everything that happens after that. So with that, it would be, I think that they could have definitely established that relationship better within that scene, but they don't spend a ton of time on that. So what did you guys feel about once the movie starts to pick up? They set up this plane. It's a stealth bomber carrying 2 nukes. They're flying over. They have this hand, this sitting. It reminded me. You guys ever see car jujitsu, where it's people? They're both in a car and they basically have a jujitsu match, but it's in the car, so it's just 2 people trying to like choke each other with seatbelts and stuff like that.
That's awesome.
But from this moment on is like really when we start to get into it. And I did think that the first 20 minutes, 25 minutes was pretty slow of setting that stuff up, of getting us in the world, finding out who some of the people are in like the situation room. But how'd you guys feel about the movie once it starts to get a little bit more actiony? Because I would say that from that moment where John Travolta does turn on him, it does pretty much go at a pretty fast pace for the rest of, I guess, the hour and 10 minutes from there.
Me.
Oh no,
not for me. This was like one of those start and stop movies for me, where I'm like, okay, 15 minutes here, let me get something to eat, let me make some popcorn, let me come back to it. It just doesn't have the momentum like Speed did. And I remember I saw Speed in the theater, I saw Broken Arrow in the theater, and Speed, just I guess it's also because of Keanu Reeves and just how much you're invested in him, and how believable he is. I thought Christian Slater was just someone I just couldn't get behind. He was just so like uninteresting to watch. I didn't buy him as an action hero. And just nothing really happens in the movie. You have a couple of, set pieces, but it just lulls you to, for me, it just kind of lulls me to sleep, because it's shot in the desert. There's nothing visually interesting. Cuts back to the command center, like a million action movies I've seen and a lot of B movies that I've seen. And it's just people on the phone, staring at screens, arguing with each other, then cutting back to the main action. And then stuff happens and it's over. And I guess because John Travolta is not taking this movie seriously, I just didn't feel like there was any threat or anything at all. Because once you start thinking about how's he going to get away with this, right? Stealing a nuke, and what is he going to do? And it just, things just start falling apart for me. And I just felt that I didn't take any of it seriously. The way, like if we're comparing this with Speed, I felt there were stakes with Speed.
Yeah. What about you, Carlos?
Well, so I think I want to give a dishonorable mention to the special effects used to replicate both the plane and also in the cockpit. That was the lowest budget cockpit I have ever seen. I'm kind of like a fighter plane geek to some degree too. So, I've seen videos of the insides of these cockpits and like all the dials and stuff, and they're so interesting. And I think even, on the stealth, it's not the back-to-back, it's the side-by-side seats. But even then, it just looked like they were in a broom closet with like a curtain behind them and like joystick, flight stick controllers from a PC. It was like super budget. You didn't see any of the dials. The animation looked pretty crappy of the plane itself taking off and flying through things. So immediately the budget screamed out at me, which is crazy because clearly it wasn't a low budget movie. The things that you see later, the set pieces that you see later, are testaments to this was not a movie filmed on the cheap. It wasn't a low budget movie at all. But the CG was the first thing that took me out, and the props and stuff. As the movie started to go, I'm not gonna say like Telly said that. And once the action started, that it lulled me to sleep. I had a different effect where I caught myself starting to look at my phone. I caught myself looking up John Travolta movies, looking up John Woo histories, and the next thing you know, 20 minutes of the movie had passed me by, and so I had to rewind and I watched it again. So I watched it yesterday, and I figured maybe it's some bad timing, maybe I wasn't in the mood, maybe I don't know. I'm gonna give this another shot tomorrow, which was this morning. And so I threw it again on this morning. And as soon as the shooting started happening, back to my phone, checking emails. And at one point, I even laughed because I had been looking at something on IMDb. And I looked, and it had been 10 minutes. And I realized that it was like one long continuous gunshot for the entirety of the 10 minutes. It was just like a machine gun, like for like 10 minutes. And I couldn't tell you who was doing what, or so. I mean, and it was competently done. Some of they exploded a nuke, in a quarry or something, and like those explosions looked really a mine. I'm sorry, yeah, copper mine, and the explosions looked cool. The concepts looked cool, but even certain things like at one point there was a big telling point when Christian Slater basically figures out the plot, and he's like, "Oh, he told me in the beginning. He makes me think one way, and then he goes the other way. So he set this whole thing up." And there was a hospital listed in the truck by the nuke, so that's where we're gonna go. But that's a distraction. How would John Travolta know that they were gonna hijack that Jeep in front of them? Right, with the nukes in it, like there's no way he could have known. Or you brought me back to the mine. I actually wanted to explode this nuke in the mine because I had this planned out from the beginning. So it's like on every level, it failed to grab me. I didn't think the acting was very good. I didn't think the set pieces, although expansive, were very interesting or well done. I didn't think the plot made sense. It was just like in every instance that it could fail me, it did. However, having said that, there are worse things. It didn't offend me. I don't know if that makes sense. Like I know this is bad, but I was okay having it on in the background while I did other stuff. This wasn't like, God, get this thing off right now. So I mean, I don't know. That's
I don't know. I'm in the opposite camp because I feel like all the signs were there at the beginning for the promise that it was making. Like right out the gate, there's just John Travolta's hamming it up. There's this fight scene with the rope-a-dope, and I'm like, I know this is going to come up later. And then, there's like the moment with the $20 bill, and I'm like, I know this is going to come up later. And I think that once the action started and Christian Slater is like, let me get your gun, and shoots the pilot of the helicopter and the whole helicopter comes down, I'm like, oh, okay, I know what movie I'm getting now. And it just became that. For me, I guess it's like whether, like we like that or we were going into it. And I think that I went into it not expecting like a pure turn my mind off kind of thing. And overall with it, it felt like I felt like a kid watching action movies for the shit that I watched them for, not like the older me of like, is this being set up? How's the acting? Because I'm like, no, John Travolta is awful. But like even the way he smokes his cigarettes would just like everything just seemed like it seemed like a dude having fun with a role. And that's where I'm like, this is the kind of movie that I want to see that, right? Like I didn't think it was the thing that ruined the action, right? It wasn't like it had all these realistic action beats and then John Travolta's acting that way. And it's like, oh, that's stupid. It was like, oh, this this element is exaggerated with this element. The dude crashes a helicopter by shooting the pilot from the ground. And then I think that they just kept adding more moments that were kind of on par with it, with like the way John Travolta dies of being physically hit with a nuke to kill him is up there with that same moment. Yeah,
to me that was unforgivable. Where
like
you don't you have the villain not even like screaming and whatever, just like getting his comeuppance, right? You just didn't feel that John Travolta got his comeuppance because he was probably like, hey, I don't want to die. He got
his ass pretty good.
He got his ass kicked in the physical, because like for some of the stuff of with like in terms of the action, some of the deaths I thought were like really fun. So who was it? Howie Long, who gets kicked out of the train, and they didn't use the Wilhelm scream. I forgot. It's the Howard scream. Everything about this movie for me just screamed mid-90s blockbuster hit. And I think like even with comparing it to like when looking at Graham Yost, the writer's credits, when I look at like Speed, the context was so different. Like from the beginning, it was like, we're going to play with an elevator. I had never seen an elevator used like that. Then it's followed by, we're going to use this bus in a way. And it had that kind of interaction as like a 12 Angry Men, right? Like, you have all these different passengers. You have the scared old lady. You have the guy on the cell phone who thinks he's too cool. You have the hot shot. Like it had all these different character types where I'm a little torn on it because this one so relied on so few people to drive it, and the personalities weren't there in my opinion. But I did and the set pieces weren't there either. I thought that like the desert was very barren. It wasn't like a big character piece, but given that that's what they had, there was a moment where I think it might have been the first helicopter explosion, and there were just 80 explosions after that. Like the chopper crashed, and then it was just like another minute of explosions. And you could see that there were certain moments where it was like stunt people diving out of the way. And I was just like, fuck yeah. Like just nothing but explosions, squibs, and stuff like that. And I don't know. For me, it was just really nostalgic.
I mean, so like even that scene that you're talking about where he takes down the helicopter, right?
Yeah.
She throws the gun to him. She goes, you have a gun? He goes, yeah. He takes the gun, leans back, and unloads all 6 bullets into air and hits nothing.
Yeah.
It's absolutely nothing.
Yeah.
Now, say this what you will about Asian cinema. Chow Yun-fat would have hit that pilot in the first hit. Chow Yun-fat would have been looking in the other direction, shot him, ricocheted off the wall. It hit the guy in the cockpit and knocked it down. And so, I mean, even the setup, it was just like, even visually, it wasn't. And I know what you're saying about like turn your brain off and enjoy the ride. But here's the difference. A movie like Face Off, again, I have to watch it again, but at least the movie that Face Off is in my memory, you understand it's ridiculous and over the top. Nicolas Cage acting crazy. John Travolta doing his best Nicolas Cage impression, which is really great. And at a certain point, you make the active decision, I'm going to turn my brain off and just enjoy this for what it is, even if some of this is ridiculous.
Mm-hmm.
But it's an active choice of you giving into the movie that disbelief. You're suspending that disbelief because you actively want to make the most out of this movie. This movie in particular, I didn't shut my brain off. This movie shut my brain off.
Mm-hmm.
All right, and so it wasn't a choice where I said actively participating in shutting my brain off to enjoy this.
Mm-hmm.
This movie, about 5-10 minutes in, my brain was just shut off automatically on its own, not through force of will. And I had to actively try to turn my brain back on to get back into it. And again, I threw it to maybe it's just a mood. Sometimes you're just not in the mood for this kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
But I gave it 2 shots and the same thing happened twice. So yeah, it is a shut your brain off kind of movie, but it's a forced upon you kind. It's not, Well,
because every time John Travolta comes on the screen, he reminds you're watching like a silly movie. That he doesn't take it seriously. He's not playing it for anything. And I think that, the problem is the 2 leads. It's John Travolta's performance, and then Christian Slater is just kind of miscast. in the film.
And the girl too.
And the
girl
too.
Ranger, she was
Samantha
terrible.
Mathis is also, she's no like Sandra Bullock, in Speed. And,
But they had her, but she's a ranger, and they have her on top of a truck, leaning off the side of a truck, trying to punch the shit out of the driver.
Yeah.
Then the guy shoots, he falls over,
felt,
right? And then she's
yeah.
on top, she throws the gun back, but she's a park ranger. Where did she get all this Navy SEAL training? Which I do say is fun. That is fun.
I would say ridiculous. Though, if this film was recast, it probably the movie would have been instantly better. Like the person who played the villain playing it straight as a straight movie, villain. A better guy in Christian Slater's role, and someone more interesting in the park ranger role.
Yeah, I see. I don't know, because the thing is, if you do that, it's still ridiculous as fuck. So, you in that context, you would have to
ridiculous personality,
rewrite
I don't know
everything.
Let's play a little, because I was thinking, because my mind starts wandering too when I watch movies like this, and I was thinking of Avenging Force, because there was those scenes where they cut back to Command Center. I was like, if this was Michael Dudikoff in the Christian Slater role and John P. Ryan in the John Travolta role,
but you leave Kurtwood Smith alone. He's a genius.
It would have been infinitely better, and maybe Steve James is the Park Ranger. You reimagine that role, but it would have. I felt that
he has to play Delroy Lindo.
Yeah,
that's true. Yeah.
Well, that's another thing that I had a big issue with. You have all these great character actors, and you don't play to their strengths. Mm-hmm. So you got Kurtwood Smith just playing.
You can call anybody dumbass the entire movie. How you gonna have a movie with Kurtwood Smith and he doesn't call somebody a dumbass? You have
Kurtwood Smith and you just waste him just playing this generic role. You have Delroy Lindo just also wasted. Frank Whaley from Career Opportunities. He's just playing a generic character. Howie Long was terrible
in the ROTC.
In the movie, so
all right,
these you had these great characters, and if Kurtwood Smith was the villain, this would have also just been 10 times better immediately.
And those action sequences would have been lit.
Yeah. No, I'm with you. I'm with you on some of that. I like some of the choices, but for me, and it's interesting when we get to a friend of the show, Roger Ebert's opinion. Some of the stuff is I don't. Having more serious actors, the plot of the plot itself is super far-fetched, but again, for me, I thought when you're using the helicopter blades to kill a guy, when you're doing there was one moment from Delroy Lindo where it just had that feel for me, and this is what I thought the whole movie had for me, where he's like, oh shit, what does he say? Oh, he goes, you know what orders are? Because I'm about to break them. It's that if I told you I'm writing a script and I have this line that I really like, and you're like, what's the line? And I told you, you'd be like, yo, don't put that in that because it's cheesy as shit. And the thing is that I have an issue with is, and I probably say this on every podcast, I'm like, did they make what they set out to make? Because I think about what the intention is, if things are falling flat, and what could possibly be the intention. When I look at all these choices, I feel like they kind of line up with each other of that when I watched this, it had a lot of tropes that I love. I love when the hero and the villain talk to each other on a phone. When they catch up and he picks up the John Travolta radios him and he's pick up, and they have that. Has all this. It has the bomb with the timer. It has the commander who's going to break the rules to believe in this person. The shooting down a helicopter with one bullet. Getting hit with a nuke and dying. And when I pair all of these things together, I think I would agree more if only one of those happened where everything else happened, right? If this was a serious plot and John Travolta was hamming it up, I'd be like, damn, he really ruined the credibility of my, he took me out. But I feel like any of these things I mentioned would have taken me out of any other movie. But when I put them all together, I'm like, oh, this is a kind of high budget canon film in that regard of just not having Michael Dudikoff. You know what I'm saying?
So a far better film, in my opinion, at least, True Lies, had a similar fate for one of the characters, its main villain. Mm-hmm. Right, so in True Lies, the villains are fighting and Schwarzenegger are fighting on top of the Harrier jet. Mm-hmm. Schwarzenegger gets back into the cockpit, rolls the plane a little bit. Somehow, the bad guy gets his his bag or his whatever he had connected to a missile. Arnold Schwarzenegger gives the line, "You're fired," and shoots him and kills him.
Mhm.
Right? This death is kind of similar, being kind of killed by a projectile, even though you're not necessarily riding it. It was a smart remark right before it goes over. And I just feel like that was so much more of an effective. The villain, that terrorist, wasn't hamming things up. He was a little bit more serious, but the movie by and large was a hammy, kind of jokey, not too serious action film. But Arnold Schwarzenegger got to play the ham, and
but it had a
with
lot
some
of
degree
going
of
for it.
success.
I mean, you have Tom Arnold as a comic relief. You have a lot of like sequences of the fish out of water. You had a lot of comedy through Jamie Lee Curtis. So like in terms of tone, like the thing for me is where these bad things happen, nothing surprised me from it. Like if by the half hour, if you like, look, a dude is going to get killed by the helicopter propeller, I'm like, I believe it. But I think if I said it, when you get to Arnold Schwarzenegger riding the horse through these places, fighting in the urinal, like at certain times it's like serious, but it also another good movie, True Lies. But I thought that they worked in terms of that movie had like a comedy angle to it. So I wasn't surprised by "you're fired," right? Like that wasn't coming out of left field, where I felt like a lot of these weren't coming out in left field, because already by the first 10 minutes, I was like, this is kind of ridiculous. But, yeah, I think it's just, and there wasn't like comedy with this one. Like it wasn't like a funny movie. It was just ridiculous action, turn your brain off action.
That's not true. He tried to be funny.
I think like John Travolta, every scene he's in, he's trying to be funny.
He's trying to be funny.
He doesn't have the lines.
Quips.
The dialogue doesn't fit it. The scene doesn't fit it. But he's trying to be like, oh, he's such a likable asshole, and he's not. He's trying to do like Kurtwood Smith and like RoboCop. And he can't do it. But I guess no one told him to stop, because he was John Travolta at that time. Because
stop being yourself, John Travolta.
Without the mystique, he was riding that wave of a comeback. And I'm sure if you showed this movie now to someone who doesn't know who John Travolta is, they'd be like, "This movie's terrible." This guy isn't even taking his movie seriously, and not in a good way. But he's just, this is a case where it's just the actor not servicing the character, and the movie servicing the actor.
So what do you think about the the overall story? I mean, I feel like I kind of already have an idea, but this was Graham Yost, who's has a
Power Ranger.
No, he has a really interesting. No, R.I.P. The Green Ranger. This movie had not this movie. This writer has like a really wild resume. So when it comes to movies, Speed 2, Mission to Mars. He's the creator of Apple TV's Silo, Justified, and Boomtown. Has some awards for The Pacific, Band of Brothers, Nickelodeon's Hey Dude, and shout out to writing an episode of Herman's Head.
Oh wow, nice!
All right, good for him.
That is
that's a working screenwiter. Good for
yeah, absolutely. So,
but also all over the place.
Yeah, a little bit of something. Do you think that a big responsibility of the movie not working for you guys was in the script, or do you think it was more of the execution of the actors and stuff like that?
Like Carlos, I was also skimming IMDb and stuff while I was watching this movie, just kind of trying to understand what was going on. So from my understanding, looking at the trivia, a lot of stuff was cut out of this film. So they said I'm pretty sure they had more of a first act, and there was more character development. So I don't blame the screenwriter. I would imagine they was just trying to streamline this movie. Where I put the blame is really on John Travolta and the casting. I thought the casting was just like not good for this film. And John Woo, he's a Hong Kong director working in the studio system. He's probably limited. I'm sure he was limited in terms of what he was able to do with the budget that
even
he had.
culturally.
And also like coming off of Hard Target, which wasn't like that
wasn't like some blockbuster either.
Yeah, but also I imagine in Asian cinema too, you've got people willing to work 14, 15 hours a day. Like Jackie Chan also has a really interesting thing where he just talks about the difference in culture between Hollywood and Asian cinema, and
no
if we need to
unions and
spend here.
everything. Yeah, and
I'm sure
people
John
risking
Travolta
their
wasn't
lives,
doing his
yeah.
own stunts or willing to like
Well,
take
you
any
saw
kind
that.
of risks.
I was watching his HD. I saw the stuntman a million times, like during the fight scenes. Like Christian Slater stuntman is like very visible in one of the scenes in the mine shaft.
Mhm.
But yeah, no, I don't necessarily put the blame on the script because I don't know what the script probably looked like before it got produced. But that wasn't the biggest problem. I'm sure that this could have been very speed like in terms of just the some of the pacing and everything, but just maybe this is a situation where the actors, the director, the screenwriter just probably were on whole different wavelengths.
It
Yeah, I
does feel
wonder
like the kind of
because
movie that.
yeah,
Sorry, go ahead.
no,
Let me say,
good.
this does feel like the kind of movie where I'm sure that there were a lot of changes during the filming of it. I feel like, again, in my head, John Travolta was like, "Let's add a scene where I fuck Christian Slater up for 5 minutes while being condescending to him," or I don't like. This definitely does feel like John Travolta's hands were all over this, and maybe to the extent
Throwing his
where.
weight around for sure.
And what can John Woo really say? He's a the big shot in Asian cinema, but you're making a Hollywood movie with a guy who is on the rise again.
Not even on the
in
rise.
Hollywood.
He's 2 years out from winning an Oscar. So it's like, with Quentin Tarantino, so it could be, one of those situations where imagine your second crossover movie going from, action legend Jean-Claude Van Damme to Oscar winning actor who's like, hey, I have a couple of ideas for this scene. I'm not saying that that's what happened, but, you'd probably be like, hey, maybe this guy knows a thing or two. Do your thing, right?
And also, it's funny you say that. I feel like Van Damme might have been a better choice than Slater for this role.
Yeah, well,
Van Damme might have brought a different vibe to it that might have worked better.
I'm curious
look more
because
capable than Christian Slater.
Yeah, I am curious because John Travolta was originally cast in Christian Slater's role, and at some point they switched him to the villain, which I think is an interesting choice because if you go further in John Travolta's partnership, he plays the good guy in Face Off. The bad guy again in Face Off. So I do wonder if he's like didn't like that. Like he probably, first off, the movie was a success, Broken Arrow.
Mm-hmm.
So I assume that John Woo was likely on board with it, but I do probably feel that John Travolta's like, hey, let me just try a couple things right now and I'm gonna smoke my cigarette like this.
Yeah. But he doesn't have any jokes, that's the problem. Like you compare this with like Dennis Hopper, his performance of Dennis Hopper in Speed, where like Dennis Hopper has the charisma, he's got the llines, pop quiz, blah, blah, blah. But John Travolta has no lines in this movie that are like memorable. He's just being a dick. And look at me, look how funny I am. And I feel like he was probably playing these bad guy roles because like in Pulp Fiction, he's a hitman. So he's probably doing the anti-hero thing. He's like, oh, that's my new thing,
Yeah.
I love these
like,
impressions, by the way. You guys are great.
He's like, I don't want to work with any more babies. I'm too look who's
no
talking
more talking baby movies. I'm gonna play like the bad guy.
So let's talk about film Go John Woo. I mean, Better Tomorrow, The Killer, Hard Boiled. Real quick, are you guys a killer or hard boiled person?
Apples and oranges. If I'm feeling emotional,
Yes,
it's killer. And if I'm feeling like a badass, it's hard boiled. I mean, it's tough. That's like saying, do you like Guns N' Roses or Mary J. Blige?
Those are two different moods. And yeah, something emotional and more like character development, definitely The Killer, and something just balls to the wall is Hard Boiled. But I think one of the I referenced that movie before, but I think the movie that like meets in the middle is Bullet to the Head, where there's like emotional impact, but there's also crazy action.
Where does a Better Tomorrow fit in that?
Better Tomorrow, that was like John Woo's like breakthrough action movie that has a good story. That's probably more story than it is like spectacle.
Action. Yeah. Agreed.
And Better Tomorrow 2 is more spectacle than story because he had to bring Chow Yun-Fat back and he just played his twin brother.
I love that they're like, wear his jacket too. Like they're like, here, try this on. You don't look enough like an identical twin. What'd you guys think about the style? Because I think that there's a fair amount of John Woo-isms in this movie of like the face-offs, diving, double pistols. Especially when you watch Face Off again, Carlos, there's like almost some one-to-one moments from The Killer of like the boat chases. This one had a lot of helicopters, trains, cars, shootouts. What did you think about the story aside, acting aside? How'd you guys feel about the action in this one?
No.
No,
No.
that wasn't it.
Not like I mentioned before, my test is just like, are there like memorable scenes in this movie that you go on YouTube and look for again just to kind of relive them? And you could say that about every John Woo movie, just about like his classic movies. But for this movie, there's no like, oh, that I gotta show you this scene and from this movie. You know, Carlos, remember back in the day when we were watching John Woo movies? I was like, oh, check out this ending in The Killer, you know, in the shootout in the church. Whereas this Broken Arrow doesn't have any of those scenes at all.
Yeah, I tend to agree. There's nothing stand out, particularly in the direction or even in the execution. And I think a problem for me as well, Telly kind of made me think about it, is just believability. Again, remember, we were talking about some random park ranger and she's on top of a car punching the driver from the top. And I don't believe it, but Michelle Yeoh could do that. And I'm fucking 100% yes, Michelle Yeoh would definitely be able to jump on top of that car and do that. So I think John Woo, unlike Face Off, was trying to conform a little bit, maybe after not great sales of Hard Target, to conform a little bit more to the Hollywood style of action movie sequences and only use his cinematic flair for the dramatic portions of the film, which again are the pans and the slow motion shots. But as far as the action sequence, this reminded me a little bit of The Rock, but I just feel like The Rock was far superiorly executed. Not that Nicolas Cage seems any more capable than John Travolta or Christian Slater per se, but somehow, some way, the way it was presented, it attracted my eye more, where again, for this movie, a lot of the action sequences for me were just IMDb pages or Wikipedia pages, because it just couldn't keep my eyes to the screen, unlike something like Hard Boiled, where you can't take your eyes off the screen, even in times where they slow down a little bit to get a little bit emotional. Even something like, to Telly's point, like moments, it doesn't have to be a bombastic moment. But, one moment that always sticks out to me is in Hard Boiled, he is trying to blow up something in the hospital. He's got like a bullet inside a pipe and he's afraid about like shooting it. There was more magnetism to the screen watching the tension of him planning to take a shot at an inanimate object than anything I saw in this movie. I will say, with the exception of Christian Slater shooting between that girl's legs and shooting that other dude in the dick.
Yeah.
I caught that. It's funny how I caught that too, because I just looked up when it happened. I'm like, cool. And then I went right back down to my stuff. But yeah, I don't think anybody was serviced to. This is generic. I think it was just serviceable. It didn't offend me, but it couldn't keep my attention.
Yeah, I think that's a really good word for it, the generic part. Not so much the action for me, but I think the thing that I usually see about action is where it's rooted in. And action for action's sake can work, but I think like for the examples that we're talking about, they're very location based. And I think that like when you think about a Hard Boiled, you put him in a hospital and there's so many other stakes. There's things that you have to think about, is whether you're creatively using the space. One of the things that happened when I was before I watched the movie, I was like, let me go back and watch the trailer. And when I watched it, I was almost like, oh, damn, maybe should have picked like a Face Off or something, because it was like, when you see a trailer, you can pick out your set pieces and you're like, oh, this is probably your third act. This is probably your first. And it was like plane over the desert, Christian Slater outside with a helicopter in the desert, train driving through the desert, a mine in the desert, and it did feel very constrained with that, where you even at the beginning of Hard Boiled, which takes place in the like the bird the cafe,
Yeah.
and it's such like a visually striking moment where it stands out as a location. Even when I watched the trailer for She Shoots Straight, there's a moment where they're in a like a bird cafe. I'm not sure, not a bird cafe, but where they have that the same, pretty much the same look. And I was like, oh shit, Hard Boiled, like instantly. And I didn't think that this one had that, where like when you watch when you watch the trailer for Face Off, there's him in that like that cyber jail where they have the they lock down their feet, boat chases, like a whole bunch of different stuff. Where
in Stargate you have the desert too. I'm just joking.
Yeah. We know how I felt about that.
Because I watched a lot of direct-to-video movies during this time, and there was like some rip-off versions of this, and it kind of looked the same because you're shooting on the desert, then you're cutting back to some like war room where
Fractured
people are
quiver.
arguing, right? And just just the production design, I thought it was also just not quite there. Just visually, you're just missing something. Just even lighting the desert, just doing something interesting with it. There's just
all
nothing going
daytime.
on. Like when an explosion happens, it doesn't happen in the middle of nowhere, so it's like, okay, big deal. I thought, like, I was thinking of like Die Hard with a Vengeance and the first act of that movie where they're worried about like a bomb going off, they're like evacuating schools, there's some threat. And even as I was watching this again during the first act, I'm like, oh, this is feeling like a disaster movie, a little bit. I wonder if they're going to go in that direction, but they don't. So you just don't understand like what else is going on outside of the main story. There doesn't seem to be anyone concerned outside of the main characters. I know they're trying to keep it a secret, but they're not doing anything to kind of warn people or do anything, take any precautions or go after John Travolta. It's just they just let it play out, which is bizarre.
Well, there's certain things that are in the story, but it does start to feel very constrained for the sake of like, whenever you see sometimes the writing contains itself for the budget. So it's like, I get it. The nuke goes off. So that's the EMP. So they can't contact anyone. But at the end of the day, to your point, like whether there's like a justification for it, it still is removed from the stakes. So it's like, oh, let's stop it from getting to where it could be a problem versus a Die Hard where it's like, oh, it is a problem now. And now there's that extra layer. And I think like a Face Off had that with double meanings for a lot of the stuff. Same thing with The Killer, where you're like, these are two people, but there's another layer there that adds to the dynamicism between this exchange, where that could have happened with this like rivalry of friends, but since they weren't friends, it was very on the surface in that regard. So I do agree with that point. Speaking of another GOAT, I was pleasantly surprised to see Hans Zimmer as the music on this one. Known for, I mean, he was already him by the time this movie came out. Rain Man, Driving Miss Daisy, Crimson Tide, The Rock, Armageddon, Gladiator, Pirates of the Caribbean, Dark Knight, Inception,
Foghorn.
I went back and
Dune, I think too.
Yeah, I went back, listened to the soundtrack on YouTube, and there's some bangers on here, and it's also some of that like very set the staple of like the thriller action movie. I mean, we've mentioned a bunch of movies from here, like The Rock, and has
Crimson
that
Tide.
Yeah, and I love Crimson Tide. Did the soundtrack stand out to you guys at all, or was it just kind of an afterthought? Because I thought there was one moment, the like little guitar riff, I feel like I've heard so much after that, and I was reading up on it, and it seems like this was kind of the staple for that. But while watching, it didn't jump out as much to me, but there were a couple of moments where I was like, damn, that is a banger.
There were like some interesting things that he does, and as I was scrolling through the IMDb, seeing that he was influenced by Morricone, trying to get a spaghetti western vibe. I'm like, oh, okay, that sounds interesting, but I don't think he goes far enough with it. But the movie also is not that kind of movie, so it was okay, it was there, but a good soundtrack has to have a good movie to kind of complement, and that's not
true. Xanadu. So for me, actually, I did notice the soundtrack. again, I think I'm usually the one of the group who'll notice not necessarily the songs, but more like the orchestration. And there's a theme that they had in the kind of in the beginning, and I'm not sure if it was a common kind of sound effect for Asian cinema for some of the overly dramatic shots, like when they're explaining what a broken arrow means, and he has that stupid line about, "I don't know what's more scary, the fact that we have a missing nuke, or the fact that we have a term for it."
Yeah.
But there were other movies around that time that kind of had the same. It reminded me a little bit of some of the non Los Lobos music in not El Mariachi in Desperado.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, some of the music playing in the background while conversations are being had. I don't know if it was an issue symbolic of the time, or if maybe there was some Asian sensibilities coming in for some of that dramatic stuff. But I did notice the music, and it was good again. But to Telly's point, it's just like, if the movie's not holding my attention, it's kind of hard to focus on the music. When there's something about a movie that's like a good movie in a good action sequence, that the music is adding to the hype and the sense in the action sequence. The action sequence is kind of shot rhythmically to keep up with the way the music is being shot, and the way they kind of go hand in hand. It's such a beautiful thing when it works. I think a good example of that is Terminator 2, right?
Yeah.
Any of the chasing sequences where, just think about T-1000 running after the car in the hospital when they save Sarah Connor, right? Some of that stuff. And unfortunately, Hans Zimmer did, I think, the best that he could with what he had, and just there was nothing in the movie for me for the music to grab onto, to synergize with, to come up and make the whole better than the two parts. So, I appreciated what was there. I just wish there was something more to say.
Like, go back to Lion King. Your skills aren't needed here. So, did you guys have any favorite scenes from this, or anything that stood out to you?
Don't jump, Telly. I'll go first.
I guess. Okay.
First.
I do, but for different reasons. That scene when Samantha Mathis tries to wave down the helicopter, I get always freaked out watching old movies with helicopter scenes, because I've seen the footage of the Twilight Zone accident.
Twilight Zone
from back in the day, where Vic Morrow and the two kids got the helicopter fell down, and the kids got
Why would you watch that
decapitated.
footage?
Carlos, you might have seen it with me, because we were watching those like tapes.
Faces of Death.
Yeah, like Death Scenes Part 2 or something like that. But and just watching that, I was like, it always makes me uncomfortable watching like those types of helicopter scenes. So I guess that was memorable for me, because I'm just thinking like, wow, did they shoot this like practically, and how do they just make sure that stuff like that doesn't happen? But not necessary for the as a scene in the movie
itself.
That was memorable. Yeah, I can't really think of anything memorable in the movie, because at the end I was just comparing it. The scene on the train, I was just comparing it to like in Super Cop, Police Story 3, when they're fighting on the train and all the crazy shit they were doing on there, compared to like this movie, or even like the first Mission Impossible movie. And I was just like, oh, okay, whatever.
How about you, Carlos?
Yeah, there was this, and not because this is like an amazing scene, it just made me laugh. Was they're in the car, it's John Travolta, his squad, Howie Long, and the money guy.
Yeah,
and the money guy just wouldn't shut up. He just say, "We lost everything," and he goes, "Just shush!" And he just like fucks him up, he beats the crap out of him, and knocks him out. And again, I was just kind of like on my phone scrolling, and I looked up, and I just happened to catch that, and I found it really hilarious, because, again, to the point of that really annoying person at the office, like, conversely, even though John Travolta played that annoyingly aggressive for no reason, annoying person at the office, there's also the person at the office who, like, can't see the hint that you're trying to do something, and they want to talk to you anyway. Like, I'm a big guy, so, like, I'll have my big-ass headphones on at work, and if you see my big headphones on, it's usually the cue to, like, leave me the fuck alone. Like, I don't feel like talking. I make a big show out of it. If somebody comes over to like talk to me, I go, I'm back.
You're back. Yeah. Now you're coming through. You're built in, but we can hear you.
So yeah, that scene basically really made me laugh because it just reminded me of all the times and all the people at work I just wish would shut the f up and leave me alone. So I've been there in John Travolta. It was the most realistic thing, the most relatable thing John Travolta did in the entirety of the movie.
I feel like the real takeaway is knowing how you feel about people in your office, but I digress.
Yikes!
For me,
There are some viewers. There are some viewers from my work. I should probably. I love you guys. I'm just joking. It's just jokes, guys. It's just jokes. It's just jokes.
Talking about another office. That was my last job.
Keep the flashlights away from Carlos. Yeah.
No, for me, it was the two moments really stood out. The Howie scream when dude got kicked out, because I haven't heard it in a movie. I feel like now there's just so much of a desire to make things like realistic, not take you out, be really serious. And anytime you use the when someone dies, it's just like, it just reminds me of like a commercial or at that time. So that jumped out. But probably my favorite is when Terry Carmichael is on the train and she's trying to stop the nuke from going off, and this like nerd turns around and he goes, "You thought I was just a computer nerd?" And he's like, "I'm a Navy SEAL." And she fucks him up. She throws a hammer at his head. No, he like punches her like out of nowhere. She just goes stop him. He knocks her out, and he's like, "You thought I was just a computer nerd?" And I was like, "Yeah,"
yes.
Because he's like, there's always a computer nerd in these movies, and I thought it almost like broke the fourth wall a little bit.
It totally broke the fourth wall. It was just that scene comes out of nowhere. It's such a meta scene, and you wonder if that was even in script, because there's like that type of comedy is never set up.
Never. It came.
That would have been
so
a scene from like National Lampoon, a Loaded Weapon or something.
Yeah. And it was the nerdiest dude who was like, "Yeah, I mean, that just jumped out to me." But yeah, Broken Arrow. This movie is a 53% on Rotten Tomatoes and has an audience score of a 44%.
Oh,
sounded about right to you guys?
Yeah.
IMDb 6.1 out of 10. Letterboxd a little bit more on your level, 2.9. This movie is the lone time that Roger Ebert convinced Gene Siskel to change the verdict on his show. Siskel initially gave it a thumbs up, but switched it to a thumbs down after hearing Ebert's critiques.
You gotta love
Ebert called it. Ebert called it a slow, talky action thriller that plays like an homage to the fallacy of the talking killer. This fallacy occurs when all the bad guy has to do is pull the trigger and his problems are over. Instead, he talks and talks until his target escapes from his predicament. Ebert queried, "The purpose of a digital readout on a bomb, who will ever see it? Except in a Mad Bomber movie," and summed up the film saying that it all comes down to two guys fighting on a burning train for a channel surfer.
Also, didn't put any trackers on these things? How do these nukes not have trackers? Just seems like
Before
something
air
you want to throw in
tags.
there.
Yeah.
I
think they were just hoping they could like track it through Goodwill. We're gonna go to Letterboxd, and we'll start with the bad review. This is from Vasquez, who gives this movie a 0.5 out of 5.
Damn.
Broken Arrow doesn't have a single thing going
she
for
killed
it.
in Aliens?
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, back for this one review. It's an extremely dumb movie, but even worse, it's an extremely boring movie. Travolta is wasted here, so is Delroy Lindo. Somehow Howie Long is in the movie and has something like a dozen lines. How the hell did this happen? Most important, John Woo wastes himself. The action is uniformly boring. Woo's Slater and Travolta barely leave an impression. More the script's fault than the actors, and the visual look of the movie reeks of the 90s. The cat and mouse game is done bigger and better in Face Off. Complete crap. Hard Target was so much better. 0.5 out of 5. Mm-hmm. And on the good, Gonzo Appreciator says, this is peak 90s action. Everything in this is over the top and endlessly entertaining. Travolta is wonderful as the villain, and Slater is as charming as ever. Also, Travolta has one of the best death scenes in action film history. While this obviously isn't as good as some of John Woo's Hong Kong films, I do think this is probably his best American film. Though I need to rewatch Face Off again before I say anything definitive, and one of the best action films ever made in the West. 5 out of 5.
When was that written?
Oh, that I gotta check. Gotta check. I feel like these are fairly. I feel like these are more recent because it's peak
so
90s.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I mean, listen,
So
I appreciate Gonzo as much as the next guy, but that guy's bugging. I want to know what he's on because one of the best action movies ever, but not as good as his Asian films. So what does that mean? I guess Hard Boiled is the best movie ever made. It's The Godfather.
yeah, well, this is one of the best films made in the West. So
I did say the West. Okay,
this whole hemisphere. But we heard from Siskel and Ebert. We heard from randos on Letterboxd. We're gonna find out what the opinions that really matter, and that's the Shoot Punch Kick team. So we're gonna dive into the personal reviews, and let's go with Telly. What did you think about Broken Arrow, sir?
Oh man, so yeah, I remember watching this movie back in the day. I couldn't follow what the hell was going on. Now that I'm older, I did kind of follow what was going on, but when I first saw it, I just walked out thinking like, "Oh my god, that was a John Woo movie." There's nothing memorable about that film. It's a complete blur. And watching it again now, I can see why I just never revisited it after 28 years. So I got to give this a half of a Maglite to the throat out of 5.
Whoa, our lowest score thus far on
so,
the pod.
Yeah. Because I expect more from John Woo.
You're like, I'm not mad. I'm just disappointed,
disappointed. Yes.
Carlos, what say you?
I say I don't remember disliking this movie as much as Telly did, or as much as I did when I was younger. I really expected to enjoy this movie. I figured, it wasn't going to be as good as Face Off, but I just never remember thinking it was bad. I remember thinking it's not as good as Face Off. So I was really disappointed in this movie's inability to maintain my attention. And again, there was nothing in it that was offensive. It was just very generic and basic. And
John Travolta was offensive, but
yeah, but John Travolta was doing John Travolta.
That's not a good thing, yeah.
What was good about John Travolta in Face Off was that he was doing Nick Cage.
Yeah.
Right. So anyway, I was disappointed in it, but again, I didn't think it was as bad as Tully did. I'm gonna give this movie 2 tactical nukes to the chest out of 5.
Okay, I will be the lone person with good taste on this. No, I'm just kidding. I was on board with this one. I think that from the beginning, I kind of saw the kind of movie it was going to be, and I thought that the some of the action was not as good as I remembered. Like I remembered Christian Slater like diving with the double guns, and I'm like, I've seen that in all these other movies. So this is really just going to be going through the John Woo hits, but I thought that it didn't have as much like creativity with some of the stuff. But that said, it had so many things that I like about the movies that I liked as a kid and in the 90s. And like I said before, the bomb with the timer on it, like, a lot of the stuff that people didn't like about this movie, I was really on board with, of just being a kind of tropey, like almost like time capsule to the, mid 90s blockbuster that didn't set it, like, it's not a Speed. It didn't reinvent anything. It was just, I thought, like it was said here, a competently made version of those movies that we saw. So that's why for me, I'm going to give this 3.5 computer nerds out of 5. I thought it was really in the road, in the middle of the road. And it's as John Travolta, like it's as John Travolta is, right? Like it's John Travolta turned up to that 10, whether, like it was not, it wasn't like great. Like I feel like Face Off, he does that a little bit, but it's more, in the context of like a gooder, like a better movie, where this one is just like, hey, we're just going to be silly with it. And this is what I would have expected at that. And I rock with Christian Slater. So to see Christian Slater on in a movie, especially doing some John Woo shit, I was like, all right, let's go. And I think I thought that they weren't used the best, but I was really happy to see some of the supporting cast, because I went in and I'm like, oh shit, it's fucking Frank Whaley, it's Delroy Lindo. And I watching this movie, I was just like, all right, I'm seeing some familiar people. So
to
this one didn't.
Christian Slater, I think Mr. Robot. To your point about Christian Slater, I think Mr. Robot would have handled this way faster.
Also
he would have
true.
just hacked something and it would have been way better.
Or
Like, I like
Dexter's
Christian
dad.
Slater too, man. I like him a lot, but I just don't see him as an action star. 'Cause
Yeah.
I do fuck with Christian Slater. I always have.
I would have preferred he'd set up
Cuss.
a pirate radio station out of his parents'
There
house.
you go.
Well, he needed
gleaming
an
some kind of
Alabama
cube.
whirly on the set. So that's it for me on Broken Arrow, and this was my choice for the week. So thanks for watching, thanks for listening, thanks for diving into this John Woo's second foray into American films. I'm sure this won't be the last time that we talk about the GOAT. So I'm going to pass the mic to Carlos to let us know what we're going to be watching on the next episode.
Thank you so much, Mr. Dash. So when thinking about what I wanted us to take a look at, I was thinking about all the movies that we've done, and everybody knows that I'm responsible for all the Kurt Russell. So I'm not going to recommend another Kurt Russell film for next week. I do notice that we have a striking shortage of Sam Raimi and also a shortage of Bruce Campbell. And so we're going to handle something a little different than we normally do this time. I think we're going to do 2 movies in a row. We're going to be taking a look at the Evil Dead series.
Yeah.
And because ostensibly Evil Dead 2 is just a remake of Evil Dead 1 with a better budget a few years later, but with the same with the same actors, the same director and everything, we thought it'd be interesting to cover both. So we'll be taking a look at both Evil Dead 1 and 2, comparing and contrasting them next week. So please stay tuned, watch it with us, and join in on the conversation. Thank you so much for joining us this week as we watched and discussed Broken Arrow. Please like, comment, subscribe. We really want to build a community and get into some conversations. We'd love recommendations on films that you'd like us to take a look at. And until next week, from the boys, both Telly and my main man, Mr. Dash, the shoot, punch, kick.
Close enough.
We're out.
It's the goddamn